Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and welcome everyone to our 8th lecture in the Project Management Professional course. In the last lecture, we started explaining planning for stakeholder engagement and planning for scope, right? So for stakeholder engagement, we developed a stakeholder engagement plan that indicates strategies that we could use in order to keep the project stakeholders engaged or positively involved throughout the project life cycle, right? And we use the tool actually for that, a tool that would help us identify the gap in the involvement level, which we call the stakeholder engagement assessment matrix, right? And then we started explaining planning for the scope. So we started with the very basic thing, which is again, the plan. So we developed a scope management plan that indicates the who's and how's of scope. So who's gonna develop the scope and how we will develop the scope and who will be responsible for tracking, validating, and so on, whatever concerns the scope. The scope depends on requirements that we also need to gather from the stakeholders. And for that reason, we also developed another plan, which is the requirements management plan. It indicates again the who's and how's of requirement management. So who's going to be responsible for managing the requirements and how are we going to gather or collect the requirements and who will track them and who will document them and report them and so on. And we actually explained that there are so many tools that you can use in order to collect or elicit the stakeholders' requirements. I think we explained like 10 or 12 tools for that. But at the end of the day, you need, and this is what we would indicate in the requirements management plan, you need to select the proper tools that you can use in your project in order to collect and document those requirements. So basically, we collected those requirements, we documented them, and we used also another tool to trace and track them, which is the requirements traceability matrix. And based on those tools, we developed a scope statement, right, that describes in details what is the work to be done, what's the work included in the scope, and what's the work excluded out of the scope, and the detailed constraints and assumptions of the project, right? The next step was that we took this scope that is now defined as a whole scope, and we broke it down into more manageable and smaller pieces in a hierarchical fashion that we call the WBS, the work breakdown structure, right? And the work breakdown structure help us basically make sure that we will not forget any part of the scope of the work that we need to do. So we started by the deliverable that we want to reach at the end of the project. And then we broke down, we did a decomposition, right? We called the tool the decomposition. So we decomposed the deliverables until we reached a level that is sufficient and necessary in order to cover all the requirements and all the work that we need to do to create the deliverables. We call these components at the last level of decomposition, we call them work packages. We also identified some control accounts and some planning packages, right? So, and we attached to that a WBS dictionary document that also describes in details and more details the components of the WBS. Now, this is the way that we use to plan for scope in traditional approaches. While in agile approaches, as we mentioned, things are a little bit different because in agile, we use what we call the inverted triangle model, where we fix the time and cost of the project and we allow the scope to to be variable, right? We document the scope in a product backlog that is owned by the product owner. So the product owner is responsible for identifying the apex features, functions, user stories that the team need to develop. And the product owner is also responsible for prioritizing and reprioritizing. This is what we call grooming or fine-tuning of the product backlog. We mentioned how user stories are developed and the form that the product owner should use while developing user stories. And we also discussed how estimating is done in agile projects, where estimation reflects the complexity of the user story, and we assign Fibonacci numbers to indicate the complexity. We estimate using Fibonacci numbers or t-shirt sizing, right? As we mentioned earlier. Okay, now we reached to this point where the product owner, as we mentioned before, should be responsible for identifying the value of user stories, and based on the value of the user stories, the product owner should reprioritize user stories in the product backlog. Now again, because the team will attack those stories as prioritized or as set by the product owner. Now, how would the product owner do that? We have also several tools that the product owner can use in order to groom. Again, it's called grooming, the product backlog grooming or fine-tuning. And by the way, this is a meeting that usually takes place before the sprint ends in a couple of days. So just before the sprint ends, a couple of days before the sprint ends, the team gather with the product owner and they try to groom the product backlog, meaning they try to, again, identify the user stories that they will work on the next sprint on, and what are their priorities, and if they need more clarification, then this is what the product owner and along with the team try to do in this meeting, the grooming meeting. Okay, now here are some tools that the product owner can use in order to prioritize the user stories. Let's start with the very simple tool, which is called Moscow prioritization. So Moscow comes from actually those words. Basically, the product owner needs to identify user stories that the product must have. So if the product owner indicates that this is a story, that this is a user story that the product must have, then the product cannot be accepted if it doesn't have this user story, if it doesn't have this feature or function, right? This is a must-have. So the product will be considered defect if it doesn't meet this feature or this function. It's a must, okay? So this is the highest priority level. The next priority level is should have. So if the product owner indicates that this is a user story that the product should have, then we need it. We need this user story. If it doesn't, if we cannot make it, then the product is still functioning. The product can be accepted, but it's a need that we need really to create. You know the difference between must and should, right? If I tell you you must see a doctor, it means that if you don't see a doctor, you're probably gonna die. You must see a doctor, okay? But if I tell you that you should see a doctor, then if you don't see a doctor, you will not die, you're not gonna die, but probably you're gonna spend like a week or more in the bed because you are very sick, right? So you should see a doctor. But if you don't see a doctor, you're not gonna die, okay? So must is the most priority level, and then should. So if the product owner indicates that this is something that we should have in the product, then it's of high priority. C stands for could have. So if a user story is indicated as something that we could have in the product, then we will leave it up to basically to the time and budget that we have. So at the end of the project, if we still have some budget and some time, then we include those user stories that the product owner indicated as could have, right? And the last priority level is will not have. So basically, this is a feature that is probably something nice to have, but we will not have it. We will not do it because we don't have time now or budget or something. But maybe, if we extend the project or if we launch a new project later on to enhance the product, maybe we could include this user story. But at this point, we will not include this user story, okay? So basically what we will try to do or to discuss with the product owner again is what are the user stories that you think that the product must have? What are the user stories that you think that the product should have? What are the user stories that you think the product could have? And what are the user stories that you think that the product will not have at this point of time, okay? So you have 4 levels of prioritization. Now, this is what we call the MOSCO prioritization, okay? Another method for prioritizing user stories is the Kano model here. Now, Kano is the name, of course, of the one who developed this model. Kano used basically 2 axes. The horizontal axis is for the requirements. So when you go right, requirements are fulfilled. When you go left, requirements are not fulfilled. Now, of course, requirements are must-haves, right? Are things that we need to meet. And this is why we collected them in traditional approaches, right? We needed to collect everything in all possible details, right? So basically, when you achieve requirements, you satisfy the customer by meeting their requirements, but you don't probably make them happy because this is their right to have these requirements. It's your right, for instance, when you order food in a restaurant, it's your right to have a good food with a good taste and a hot food. This is your right. It will not make you, pretty much excited and happy because it's your basic right? To have good food and have it hot and have the service bring the food in a reasonable time. So all of these are requirements that are your natural and basic right to have, okay? Of course, if we don't fulfill these requirements, then you will be angry, right? If the food does not taste good, if the food is late, if the food is cold when it's supposed to be hot, then you will be angry, right? Because your requirements were not met. But if we fulfill your requirements, then these are the things that you expect. So you're neutral about that, right? So this is the requirements axis. While the other axis, the vertical axis, is what we need to do in order to make you delighted. It's more than satisfaction, actually. I would correct this word or replace this word with delighted. And those are the things that you probably haven't expected. For instance, you haven't expected that we will, after you finish your meal, we will give you coffee for free on the house. So this will make you what? Delighted, because this is something that you haven't expected, okay? And it makes you feel well, okay? So basically what Kano model help us do is try to differentiate between the musts that we need to fulfill. And those, of course, are the most important, right? The first priority. Those are the musts that we need to satisfy the customer with by fulfilling their requirements. and the wants. So basically the customer wants good food, good experience, good place to sit and talk, right? So it's a mixture, or it's in the area between requirement fulfilled and delight is made, right? So this is the customer, and this is what makes the customer prefers one restaurant over other, right? Because maybe two restaurants have the same quality of food, but you have a better experience here because you don't need to wait so much time, and you get some free tea or free coffee after your meal, and so on, right? So this is what you want, actually. And of course, if we go a little bit to the left side and up, then these are what we call exciters. These are the things that make the customer excited. But again, you need to make sure that those exciters should be made after we make sure that requirements are fulfilled. So basically, if you give the customer free coffee when the food does not taste good, then this will not make the customer happy, right? Because the food in the first place was not good. Okay, so basically you work on these levels. What are the things that we must fulfill? And then what are the things that we need to improve? What are the delight that we can improve in order to meet the customer wants? So basically these are needs, these are wants, and these are the things that we can add at last, and that will make the customer delighted. And I think you might know that now big companies are all trying to, exceed customers' expectations. So we don't only look for satisfying the customer or satisfying the customer wants. We now competition now is on who can excite the customer more. Okay, so this is the area of competition now, how to make the customer more excited. Okay, so this is another model for prioritization, again, user stories. Now, another model for prioritization, especially if you have features, like for instance, we have like 8 or 10 features, and we want to prioritize them. So what is the most important feature, and the next and next, and so on. So we can use this matrix or this tool that we call peer comparison, because now what we will do actually is we will take these features and we will reflect them again horizontally. So A for appreciation is here now again, A. B for achievement is here. C for work conditions is here. D for power is here, and so on. And now we will do a peer comparison. We will compare A with A. Of course, there is no comparison because it's the same, right? But A with B. So now we will ask the product owner, do you prefer appreciation over achievement, or is it the other way around, achievement over appreciation? So for instance, here the customer prefers appreciation over B, which is achievement. And the customer prefers appreciation over also C. Okay, so we are comparing now A to A to B, A to C, A to D, and so on. So in this instance, in this example, the customer preferred A over all other user stories or other conditions or features or whatever. Okay, now we do the same again with B. Comparing B to A has been done here, so no need to do it again. Okay, and comparing B to B does not make sense, so we start from B to C. So compare achievement with work condition. The product owner preferred C, for instance, which is work conditions, and comparing B with D, comparing B with E, and so on. Okay, so basically this is what we continue to do until we finish. We compare every feature with all other features every time, and again, every time, and again, every time, until you get this, okay, these results. And now what you want to do is, we will count how many times each feature was mentioned. So basically, A, which stands for appreciation, has been indicated 8 times, right, in the first row. So it's the count of A is 8. And the count of B is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 5. And the count for C is 6, if you count them. Okay, and so on. Now, of course, the result is the feature that has the highest count is the most important, right? For instance, A here has 8 counts. So the priority or the rank is 1. This is the most important thing to have, this feature, because the product owner has preferred it 8 times over other features. While, for instance, B has only 5 times, while G has 7 times, right? G, 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 G. So basically, number 2 in ranking in priority is G, which is the financial benefits, for instance, in this example, okay? So basically, this is what we do. And by doing this, we can indicate which features, which functions, which user stories have the most priority, and the next, and the next, and the next. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions so far for these tools? Okay. Rank is priority. So basically, rank 1 is priority 1. This is the most important. This is the most important feature, which is appreciation. 2 is the second priority, and so on. Rank stands for priority here. Okay. Okay. Another tool that we can use, which is also a very good actually tool because it indicates the value, is basically you take the user stories or functionalities or features that you want to prioritize, and you might have not only one product owner, you might have like 3 stakeholders. For instance, I have the marketing representative, I have the IT manager, and I have the business head. And I want to prioritize these features by asking those people on what they think is the most important feature. What I would do is I will give every person here monopoly money, you know, fake money, 100, for instance, $100. And I will ask them to distribute their money on the features in a way that they think is more important. So, for instance, the marketing representative gave the customer sign-up feature 30, and the social media sharing 20, and the customer profile 25, and tracking order 25. So the total is 100. Of course, he has only 100, so he distributed his money over the features in a way that he thinks is the most important. So, for instance, for the marketing representative, the most important feature is customer sign-up. He gave it, he basically indicated that he would invest, he would buy this feature for $30. And he would buy the customer profile feature and track order feature for 25 each. And then last for him is the social media sharing. He would buy it only for 20. Now, this is the marketing expert. The IT manager has different perspective, right? He would buy the tracking order for 35. This is the most important feature for him, for her. And the customer sign up for 25. And the customer profile 25, and so on. The business head has also other perspectives. So he distributed the money in another way. For instance, the customer sign up is the most important. They would buy it for 35, right? Now, what we do after that, how do we know now what is the most important feature? We basically add those points, right? So for instance, the customer sign up received 30 plus 25 plus 35 points, which is 65 and 90, okay? While social media received 20 and 15, 35 and 25, 55, okay? Customer profile received 70, tracking order received 60 and 20, 80, right? So basically the most important feature now is the customer sign up because it received 90 points. The next is tracking order, it received 80 points and so on, right? So basically this tool indicates in a way the investment that the stakeholders would like to invest in which features, in which user stories. And by doing this, we know how to prioritize those features, okay? Does it make sense? So these are different tools that the product owner or the stakeholders, the business stakeholders can use in order to prioritize their user stories and their features, okay? Okay, now again, consensus is important in a team. I would like to have the team agree on a common decision. It's good that all the people agree, for instance, that the size of this story is 30. And it's good to agree that for the team to agree, all of the team members agree that, for instance, the priority for this feature is number 1. Okay, for that reason, we need to do some exercises sometimes in order to gain the consensus from everyone, okay? So basically we can use several exercises, or we can use several tools. For instance, voting by using fist of 5. So we can do voting. We ask the team who agrees that this user story has a complexity of 5, for instance, or 4, or of 13. So now the people can vote, but they vote by their 5 fingers. So if you vote by 5, you strongly agree. You 100% agree that this user story has the size of 13. But if you make this the fist, then basically you completely disagree, okay? And it depends on how many fingers you raise, okay, for to agree or to disagree with the decision, whatever the decision that we are discussing here. Now, in this tool, in order to agree that we have a consensus, all of the team should have 3 fingers at least. Okay, so if all of the team members raise their hands with 3 fingers at least, then we consider that we have a consensus. Okay, because 3 means I agree, even with I have some, probably I don't fully agree. I don't agree 100%, but 3 indicates that I agree. Maybe I have some reservations, some objections, but I agree at the end of the time, because 3 is more than 50%, right? So basically this is the tool. We vote by 5 fingers. Another simple tool, which is the Roman voting. The Roman voting is either you agree or you disagree, or sometimes you can also indicate sideways, means that you are neutral, you don't agree or disagree. Or we can do a polling, survey. So basically we make a poll, and everyone indicates whether they agree or disagree with this poll. Or we can make a dot voting. I can give every person or every team member 10 dots, for instance, and I ask them to distribute those dots on the most important user stories in order to prioritize them. Again, so it's kind of prioritizing using dots, using 10 dots or 5 dots or whatever, okay? Again, so the objective here is to reach a consensus. We need to make sure all the time that we work in consensus as a team. We don't have like very different opinions or very different perspectives. Okay, does that make sense? So by this, actually, we conclude scope planning. Again, we discussed how we plan scope in traditional approaches, and we discussed how we plan scope in agile approaches, whether you are following the traditional or the agile approaches. Okay, ready for some questions for review? Let's start by the first question. Nancy, or we should okay, let's take a break, 10 minutes for, I don't know, for the prayers. And we continue after 10 minutes, okay? So we start with a few questions after the break. Okay, so see you in 10 minutes. Welcome back to the lecture, everyone. And now that we have concluded the scope planning, let's review some of the questions that you might face in the exam. Question number 1, Nancy is a senior systems engineer who loves to work with people and can't typically grasp the big picture. Because of her functional knowledge, organized nature, and ease in getting others to follow her lead, her manager decides to move her into a project manager role. Despite all of her strengths, Nancy struggles greatly with her first project. The first major milestone was missed, and the project was already over budget by $20,000. What part of the PMI talent triangle is Nancy missing? What's the cause? What's the problem? What's the issue here? Is it the technical project management, the leadership, strategic and business management, or schedule management? What did Nancy miss? Now, who can remind us, first of all, what is the PMI talent triangle? What are the 3 parts of the triangle? We have the no, this is another triangle. The triangle that you are indicating, Fahad, is the core constraints triangle, but the PMI talent triangle are the talents, is the talent or represents the talents that the professional project manager should have, right? And those are the technical project management skills and leadership, right? And business and strategy, right? Business and strategy. This is the PMI talent triangle, or the new version, as you know, which is the way of work, power, skills, and business acumen. Okay, so what is Nancy missing here? Is she missing leadership, for instance? Now, the question tells us that she doesn't miss this talent, right? Because she can get other people to lead her, to follow her lead. So she has this talent, right? Is the problem with business and strategy? No, because she grasps the big picture. She understands the big picture, the strategy. So basically what she's missing here is, yes, the technical project management. Now, as you can see, Nancy comes from a system engineer background. She probably did not receive any training in project management, in how to develop a schedule, how to plan for a scope, how to create a product backlog, how to prioritize user stories, and so on, right? These are what we call the technical project management. And for this reason, she works well with people, she can lead people, she grasps the big picture, she understands strategy, but she's not trained on how to manage a project, right? So basically, yes, what she's missing is the technical project management talent from the triangle, right? Now remember, we gave this a name, right? When we promote someone just because they are very good in their technical skills, and we promote them and make them managers or project managers, we call this effect, what we called it? I can't remember. I think we mentioned it, right? No. Yes, what you're indicating, Majd, is true when we discussed matrices, when we tried to do this by assigning someone who's coordinator. But again, was that the right thing to do? What was this called? It was called the halo effect, right? So this person, because he is a very good programmer, for instance, or very good developer, or very good engineer, we thought that it is a good idea to promote this person and make them project manager or project coordinator or whatever. Now, is this correct? Is this good practice? No, this is not a good practice, because they might be very good engineers or very good programmers or whatever, but management skills are different. Managing projects needs specific skills in developing scope, schedules, budget, and so on. Okay, so we call this the halo effect, and it indicates that this person was promoted because he was good in what he used to do technically, but this doesn't mean that they are good to be managers or leaders, right? Okay, next question. A project manager following an agile life cycle receives a request from the customer to alter a requirement. How will the project manager likely respond? Blocks change, welcomes change, prevents change, indifferent about change. So we manage this project using agile life cycle, which means, yes, that we welcome change, right? Correct. Okay, another question. Which of the following represents a benefit of using an agile approach to manage projects? Okay, we're seeking for benefits. Changes can be closely monitored and controlled. A project team can adjust processes in order to meet new or modified requirements. Risks can be identified, reduced, or eliminated early in the project life cycle. The team is not distracted by planning activities and can focus on execution. Which one is correct? Yes, of course. Yes, it's the empirical, we call them empirical processes. So the team can alter and modify the processes the way they like in order to meet the customer requirements. Correct, excellent. Another question. Which of the following best describes the purpose of the monitoring and controlling process group? What is the purpose of the monitoring and controlling process group? Formulating and revising project goals and objectives and creating the project management plan, putting the project management plan into action, measuring and analyzing project performance to determine whether the project is progressing according to the plan, bringing the project or phase to formal, orderly end. It's a very clear question, right? So what's the purpose of monitoring and controlling in a project? To make sure that we that performance is coming according to the plan, or not, of course. Next question. A project manager is currently working on a pharmaceutical project. The activities that will produce the deliverables of phase 1 are currently being planned out in detail. All other work will be planned out at higher levels until additional product details are known through testing results. This strategy in planning is also known as rolling wave planning, progressive elaboration, scope creep initiating. How do you describe this way of planning when you do a detailed plan for only phase 1 and a high-level plan for other phases? So basically the planning takes place in what? How does the planning happen? On rolling waves. Yes, so basically this is a rolling wave planning. The result of progressive elaboration. Now again, rolling wave planning is the result of progressive elaboration because we don't have details at this point. When we move on, when we proceed with the project, we will have more details and we can plan further in a new planning wave for the next phases, correct? Excellent. Giving customers extras such as adding in functionality or increasing performance not included in the project scope is known as voice of customer, halo effect, customer service, gold plating. When you give the customer something that they did not ask for, they did not ask you to add this function or to add this functionality, but you think that this is a good function or good functionality, I will add this function or functionality for the customer for free. We call this what? Yes, we call this gold plating. Now, is this a good practice? Is it okay to do that? No, it's not okay. Because first of all, you did something that is free, while it costs you, of course, something. So how do you justify the additional cost and time that you took in order to offer this free feature or function to the customer? And second, how do you know that the customer wants this? Maybe the customer specifically did not mention this because they don't want this feature in the product. You don't know better than the customer, right? The customer knows better than you what they want to include or what they don't want to include. Is that correct? So basically, gold plating is not a good practice. We should not do it. And you know now the difference between gold plating and scope creep. Do you know the difference between gold plating and scope creep? We mentioned also, or we explained scope creep, right? What is scope creep? Scope creep is when you don't identify the boundaries of the scope well, you allow basically the scope to increase, to creep. And this is also a bad practice, okay? Because if you don't agree with the customer on the boundaries, on the work to be included and the work to be excluded, then the customer will start asking you to do things, additional things that you thought were not included, but since they are not well identified in the scope statement or indicated in the WBS, then you will have this problem of uncontrolled scope creep. And this is again very bad for your project. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, another question. A predictive life cycle approach is characterized by which of the following? Select two. Scope, time, and cost are determined in the early phases of the project life cycle. Change is constrained as much as possible. Scope is determined early in the project life cycle, but time and cost are routinely modified. Deliverables contain sufficient capability to be considered complete after one iteration. Which of these identify the predictive life cycle? What do you think? Yes, correct. In the predictive life cycle, scope, time, and cost are determined early, and change is constrained. You cannot make a change without following a process, a formal process, and so on. It's not easy to make change in the predictive life cycle. Okay. C is not correct. It's partially correct because scope is determined early in the project. But time and cost are not routinely modified. No, they are only modified when needed, when there is a formal change request, not on routinely basis. Okay, so C is not correct. A and B are correct. Okay. Another question. The lowest level of the WBS is referred to as which of the following? WBS dictionary, work packages, planning packages, control account. This is a very easy question, right? Yes, the work packages. You are in the process of facilitating a working session with the project team to decompose the project deliverables into smaller chunks of work. What process are you carrying out? What's the name of this process? Plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create WBS. This is again a very easy question. Yes. What you are doing here is you are creating a work breakdown structure. Excellent. Great. Another question. You are the project manager for Lucky Stars Candies. You've identified the deliverables and requirements and documented them where? Where do you document the deliverables and requirements? In the project scope statement, which will be used as an input to create WBS. In the project scope and in the project scope management document, which is used as an input to the define scope process. In the product requirements document, which is an output of the define scope process. In the project specifications document, which is an output of the define activities process. What do you think? Where do we identify and document deliverables and requirements? Yes, in the project scope statement. So this is the detailed, again, description of the work that we need to do, that needs to be done in order to meet the requirements and create the deliverables, right? As well as the detailed constraints and assumptions in the project. Okay, another question. A project manager is providing guidance to the project team on the steps required to generate the WBS. She lists the following. Step number 1, identify the deliverables and work. Step 2, organize the WBS. Step 3, decompose the WBS components into lower level components. Step 4, assign identification codes. What is the 5th step? Now, what would be the 5th step? Identifying and assigning codes to control accounts, decomposing the work packages into activities, determining cost estimates at the planning package level, verifying the degree of decomposition. What do you think? After we reached the last level, the work package level, what do you do? Now again, the question is about generating a WBS. Okay. It's not about creating a scope or creating a cost estimates or developing a budget. No, it's only about the WBS. So what's the last thing that you need to make sure when you create the WBS? You need to do what? Yes, you need to make sure that the degree of decomposition, the number of levels that we used is what, again, is sufficient and necessary, right? This is what we have mentioned. So after you decompose and decompose and decompose, and you arrive to the last level, you need to make sure that this level is, the degree of decomposition is enough, is sufficient and necessary, as we mentioned, right? And there is what we call the 100% rule. when you develop the WBS. The 100% rule indicates that when you develop the WBS, you need to make sure that the WBS, if you look from the bottom up, you need to make sure that the WBS will cover all the scope, the whole scope. We haven't forgotten any part of the scope or any part of the work that we need to fulfill the requirements. So we call this also the 100% rule. Okay? Yes, ladies and gentlemen. And with this, we conclude planning for the scope. And now we continue to planning another aspect in the project, which is the schedule. Okay, so again, we started by planning for stakeholder engagement, and then we continue to planning for scope, and now we move on to planning for schedule, right? So basically, again, what you need to start with is developing a schedule management plan and indicating the who and how of managing the schedule in the project, and then using the scheduling techniques in order to develop the project schedule, and then you arrive at creating the project schedule. And of course, when you approve the project schedule, you get the schedule baseline, right? So let's start with first with the schedule management plan. Now again, if we look back at the process chart of the PIM book 6, just to have a look at it, okay. You see the following. So when we plan for the schedule, we start again with a schedule management plan, and then we define the activities. What are the activities that we need to do in order to create the work packages that we have identified here in the WBS, okay? And then those activities need to be sequenced. So what is the first activity to do, and then what is the second activity to do, and the third activity, and so on. So I need to create a proper sequence for those activities right from the start to the end of the project. And then we try to estimate the activity duration. So how long would this activity take? How long would that activity take? And so on. And when you finish doing this, you basically create a you create a schedule for the project. Okay, this is what we will explain here. So we start again with the plan. And the plan again is the who's and how's, right? So the schedule management plan again is a component of the project management plan that establishes the criteria and activities for developing, monitoring, controlling the schedule. So who and how will develop the schedule, who and how will monitor and control the schedule, and who and how, for instance, will report the schedule, will track the schedule, and so on. So basically it identifies or defines how activities will be defined and progressively elaborated. What is the scheduling method or tool that we will use? So basically, are we going to use the critical path method or the critical chain method? Are we going to use Oracle Primavera or Microsoft Project to create the schedule and track the schedule and so on? So again, the who and how, right? What is the format of the schedule that we will use, and who and how will develop and control the schedule? So again, it describes how we will manage the schedule throughout the project life cycle, okay? And these can be some components of the schedule management plan. So what is the model that we will use for developing the schedule? You will see there are different models, there are different schedule formats that you can use. Of course, there are different tools like Microsoft Project, like Oracle Primavera. So you decide on the model, how you want to develop the schedule and what tool you will use to develop and track the schedule and so on. You might also want to indicate the accuracy of some estimates while you develop the estimates for the activities. So you might mention in the schedule management plan that we estimate the accuracy to be around 5% or 10%. So for instance, if I say that this activity will take 10 days plus minus 5%, so this is the accuracy, right? We think that there is 5%, maybe a longer or shorter period. The unit of measure, how will you measure the schedule? With days, with hours, with weeks? So what is the unit of measure? Operational procedure links. So if you need to follow any templates, any gain policies, procedures concerning developing the schedule. Control thresholds that you will that will be used to monitor schedule performance. Now we tend to set some control thresholds that we want to monitor through when we start executing the project work. So again, we need to compare what's happening in the actual and real life and what was planned, right? For instance, if you make this comparison while you monitor and control your project, and you notices that we are 5% behind the schedule, or we are 10 days behind the schedule. And then after 1 week, we are 20 days behind the schedule. And after another week, we are 30 days behind the schedule. At some point, you need to raise a flag, right? You need to raise a flag and you need to do some corrective action, because you cannot accept that we are running behind the schedule more and more, right? So basically, this is what we call the control threshold. The control threshold is the level at which we need to raise a flag and start a corrective action, because we cannot accept that anymore. Okay, we have a tolerance, for instance, to be behind the schedule by 5% or by 10% or by 20 days. But if we are behind schedule more than that, more than the control threshold, then no, we need to do something about it, right? We need to apply some corrective action. Okay, so we call this the control threshold. Other things that we can include in the scope management, in the schedule management plan, is how to measure the performance in the schedule. Now, we will explain this more when we discuss the monitoring and controlling processes, but there are certain formulas that you can use in order to measure the performance. So in order to know if we are ahead of schedule or behind schedule, and by how much, okay? And what are the reporting formats to be used? So what are the reports that I need to develop and, for instance, send to some of the stakeholders concerning the progress of the schedule? And process descriptions to explain how schedule management processes are to be documented. So what is the required documentation and who will do them from the team who's responsible again for tracking the schedule, for instance, and reporting the schedule to different stakeholders. Okay, so again, schedule management plan describes the who's and how's of managing the schedule in the project. You can include all necessary details, and you can tailor it according to your project size and to your project complexity. Okay, so basically, when you want to develop the schedule management plan, you need to make sure, of course, to review the other parts of the project management plan, and you need to make sure that it integrates well with the scope management plan, for instance, with the cost management plan, with the quality management plan. We mentioned that all the time, right? I need to make sure of the proper integration between all the plans. And you need also to review the project charter to make sure that there is also no contradiction with the project charter, right? You need to benefit or review from the EEFs, review the EEFs, enterprise environmental factors, and see if there are any internal or external factors that affect your plan. And you need to benefit from the OPAs, organizational process assets. You might want to go back to similar projects that we have previously developed or managed, and compare and benchmark and use those previous project files in order to create a proper schedule management plan. You use tools and techniques such as expert judgment again and historical information. You do meetings with experts, with stakeholders to develop the proper schedule management plan, and you document it and of course approve it when you are done with all the management plan. Okay. So this was the first step, to create the schedule management plan. After this step, you want to start developing your project schedule. Now, what is the project schedule? A project schedule, as you might see here. Now, this is probably the most common view that you see when we discuss project schedule. This view is what we call the Gantt chart or the bar chart, because it consists of bars. This is the most common representation of a project schedule, right? Where you have here the activities that we need to do in the project, and each activity is outlined or is represented by a bar that starts at a specific date and ends at a specific date. Okay, so here you have the activity 1, which is, for instance, here setting the vision. And after this activity, you have 2 activities in parallel, right? So this activity that takes, for instance, 3 days, and this activity that takes 2 days. And then you have another activity, okay? So you see there is here relation arrows that indicate the relationship between and the dependency between those activities, and that create a sequence, right? This is what we mentioned. You need to create a sequence because those activities cannot all be made at the same time. No, you need to do them in a certain logic sequence. And by doing these activities in this logic proper sequence, you develop the project schedule, and you can expect, for instance, the project to finish on this date. Okay, so this is what we call the bar chart or Gantt chart. It's a visual representation of the activities that we will do in the project and how will they be done on a calendar representation. Okay, now you develop the project schedule, and of course, when you're done, you approve the project schedule, so it becomes the schedule baseline. And then when we start executing the project work, you track the progress as well on this schedule, right, or schedule baseline. So you want again to monitor and control the performance of the project by comparing the plan to what's actually happening. So for instance, this activity, maybe when we start actually executing the project, maybe this activity took a little bit more time, right? And it has basically pushed the next activities to take also more time. And this also probably took also little time. But maybe now this one we could compress it or try to fast track it, so we gain some time here, and here also maybe we gain some time, and so on. So basically you start comparing, right? And by comparing the baseline with the actuals, you get those performance indicators. You measure the performance of your project schedule. And this is something that we will discuss later on when we discuss the monitoring and controlling processes. But this is the idea, okay? Okay, so this is the project schedule. Now, how I start developing a schedule, again, we start by a high-level schedule, right? Now, if you remember the project charter, in the project charter, we indicated a summary milestone. So we indicated the most important milestone in our journey. So for instance, the end of the design phase, the end of the development phase, the end of the testing phase. So these are milestones or the main milestones in the schedule. Now, how do I develop those milestones? Basically, what you can do is benchmark your project to previous projects that we have managed. So basically benefit again from the OPA, from the historical data, and try to create or come up with a milestone chart that is roughly made only in the initial stage, only a high-level milestone chart something that we can start with, but when we are now in the planning, we need to make it in more, or to develop it in more details, right? So this is how you might start developing a schedule or a high-level schedule, by using the historical data again, and by benchmarking your project to other previous projects. So basically you start by indicating the milestones in the journey of the project. Now the milestone chart, by the way, is the preferred chart for the management and for the customer, because the management and the customer are not concerned with the details. They are not interested in knowing how many activities are there and what is the relationship between those activities and what's the sequence. They are not interested in all these details. They are interested in knowing what are the main milestones again in the project, and what is the expected date for each milestone. So when do we end? When do we finish, for instance, the design phase? When we finish the testing phase? When we finish the rollout phase, and so on. This is what interests the management and the customer. So we use the milestone chart for reporting to, or to report to the customer, or to the top management. Okay. Now let's go into details. How do we develop now the detailed project schedule? What we do is, again, and if you refer back to the process chart, is that we start by identifying the project activities that we need to do from day one until the last day of the project. What are the activities that I need to do? Now, how do I define those activities? What do you think we can do in order to identify those activities? Basically, we will benefit from the WBS that we have created, right? So we have created a work breakdown structure that represents the scope of work that needs to be done, right? And we reached the last level of decomposition, which is what? Which we called the work packages, right? Now, what we will do here is that we will go to the last level of decomposition, which is the work packages, and we will identify the activities needed in order to create or to finish every work package. Let's say, for instance, that we have a project, a marketing project, okay? A marketing campaign project that we need to do for a customer in order for them to reposition their products properly in the market, okay? And we have decomposed the project, and we have, for instance, arrived at the work packages. And one of the work packages, for instance, is about executing or doing a customer survey. So what does the current customer think of our products? Okay, we need to carry out a customer survey. So this is a work package. Okay, so what we do here is basically, again, who does this? It's not the project manager alone, no, the team, right? Again, so the team here will meet and discuss what are the activities that we need to do in order to carry out a customer survey. So someone might probably suggest and the team would agree that we will start by designing a survey, design a survey. And we need another activity, which is print the survey. And then we will distribute the survey to the customers. And then we will collect results. And then we will analyze results. And then we will have, the final report. Okay, and it makes sense, right? So these are the activities that we need to do as a team in order to finish this or to carry out this work package. Okay, and you will do the same for each of the work packages. So what are the activities that you need to do here? Okay, what are the activities that you need to do here, and so on. Okay, so you get list of activities. Okay, now the proper term is activity. In the software, they use the term task, like Microsoft Project, they use the term task, but the proper term is activity. Okay, sometimes in some literature they use task, activity, work package with the same meaning, but the proper term according to the PMI that those are activities. They are not even assignments, because we haven't assigned any of these activities to any of the team. We are only now identifying activities. Okay, so they are not tasks. Okay, so we have identified all the activities that we need to do from day one until the last day of the project. Now, what's the next step after you have identified those activities? What do we need to do? What's the next step? The next step is to identify the proper sequence. So what is the sequence here? For instance, can I print the survey if the design is not finished? No, I need to finish the design before I start printing the survey, right? And then I need, after we finished maybe printing the survey, we can start distributing the survey and then collecting results. See, there's a sequence that I need to identify. Let me use Microsoft Project because, of course, when you see things in action, you understand them better. So let me open the Microsoft Project software and share the screen with you. So this is Microsoft Project, and it's one of so many softwares that you can use in order to manage your project. This is the Gantt chart that I have just indicated, right? So basically what we need to do is to insert the tasks or the activities here, okay? And they will be represented here. So let's insert the activities that we have just identified, right? So the first activity was to design the survey. Now, if you notice, when I hit enter, there are certain defaults in the Microsoft Project software. It defaults the duration to 1 day, and it defaults the start of this activity to be today. So we are now in Tuesday, so it will start on Tuesday and to finish on Tuesday because it takes 1 day only, right? Okay, but now I won't pay attention to that. I need only to insert the activities, right? So design survey, print survey, distribute survey, collect results, analyze results and the final report. Okay. Now the final report is not an activity actually, it's what? I can consider it what? It's a milestone, right? It's something that we will arrive at, and it represents an important accomplishment in the project, right? And milestones don't have duration, so the duration is 0. And when you insert 0, you have this shape of the milestone. Okay? Okay. In order to make this look, better, I will give some estimation for the durations. Okay, so let's estimate the duration of each activity. For instance, the design survey will take 5 days. Print survey will take 3 days. Distribute survey will take another 3 days. Collecting results will take 5 days. Analyzing results will take 7 days. And final report is a milestone. Okay. So until the moment, Microsoft project considers all the activities to be starting today, right? Because I haven't specified otherwise. Now I need to do what? I need to do the proper sequencing, okay? Now, the most common relationship that we use in sequencing is, of course, you have expected that, is what we call finish to start, right? So you need to finish the first activity in order to start the next activity. And you have to finish the second activity in order to start the third activity, right? So basically, if you take all of the activities and you click on this button, which is the link, you get this. So the first activity, and when it finished, the second activity, and it finished the third activity, and so on. And if I go here and make a summary of the project, if we consider this a complete project, okay, you find now that, so all of these tasks will take 23 days, starting from this date and ending in this date, okay, by using this sequence. Okay, so far, any questions so far? So we identified the activities, we sequenced the activities, and we estimated the activities' duration, okay? But what happens now if you use all the relationships in the form of finish to start is that your project sounds to take so much time. And if the customer or the management ask you to compress your schedule, you need to find options, right? To compress your project schedule. Now, what are the options that you can do to compress your schedule? Now, the first thing that comes to your mind is that how can I make, or how can I execute those activities in a shorter time? So for instance, collecting results, how can we make it in 4 days, for example, instead of 5 days, right? If I can make this, then I have 22 days. So maybe I'll need to add some resources to finish this more quickly. This way of shortening a schedule is called crashing, project crashing, okay? I'll write it here. So project crashing is an option that you can use to shorten, again, to compress your project schedule by adding more resources. So if I increase the number of people working in the project, I can make these activities shorter. And by making these activities shorter, I can make the project schedule shorter, right? Now, this is one option, but this option will increase what? Will increase the cost of the project. Is that correct? Yes, because you are adding extra resources, and extra resources need more money. Okay, what other options that I have to compress the project schedule without increasing the cost? Now, if you look exactly, if you look at some of those activities can overlap, right? Like, for instance, printing the survey and distributing the survey. Do you really need to print all the copies? Like, you want to print 10,000 copies of the survey. Do you really need to wait until you print the 10,000 copies and start distributing them? Or can you do this in parallel? So for instance, you start by printing 1,000 and you start distributing the 1,000 while you are continuing printing the other 1,000, right? So basically here, the relationship between print survey and distribute survey is not necessarily finish to start, right? It can be done in other way. Which other way? Now, if you double click on the relationship, here is the relationship, okay? When you put the mouse here, it identifies the relationship between print survey and distribute survey. If you double click it, you will have here 4 types of relationships. Now, again, the most common type is the finish to start relationship. But in our example, it's not mandatory to have this finish to start. It's not mandatory to wait until all the copies are printed. I can start distributing while continuing to print other copies, right? So what do you think here the proper relationship would be? Start to start, so you start printing in order to start distributing. If you make it start to start, now let's see what will happen here, okay? So this will happen. So you start printing and you start distributing. But notice at the same time, and this might not be accurate, right? Because in order to print the first batch of 1,000 copy, it will take maybe, I don't know, maybe half a day, right? So there is a lag, what we call lag. So basically, if you want to make it start to start, you need to consider the lag. Like, for instance, 1 day. So after 1 day of starting printing, we can start distributing, right? Now see what will happen here. Okay, so we started printing, and 1 day after that, we started what? Distributing. Okay. Now, of course, you have noticed that the duration has become shorter when you did this, when you changed the relationship, right? Okay, so that makes sense. Or another way, another probably more logical way, is that the relationship is basically finish to finish. Because, for instance, if printing survey will take 5 days and distributing survey will take 3 days, you will notice here that now something has become illogical, right? Because you finished distributing while printing is on. We continue printing and distribution is finished. And this is not logic, right? So what is the logic thing here? What is the logic of this relationship? It should be what? Yes, it should be actually finish to finish. It means you cannot finish distributing until you finish printing. Okay, let's see what happens when we do this. Now, notice that is logical now. So when you finished printing, after 1 day, because there's 1 day lag, right? You can finish distributing the copies. Now, this is logical. Okay, are you following with me? Now, of course, you don't do this alone. You don't do this very quickly. You need to discuss all of that with the team, right? So you're sitting with the team, you're sitting also probably with other stakeholders, and you are discussing the sequence and the relationships. Okay, that makes sense? Okay, so basically this is what makes more sense. So now if you, again, bring back the print survey to 3 days, this is the proper sequence, and you have managed to compress your schedule. Now, again, you can also discuss other relationships, for instance, distribute results and collect results. So distribute, do I need to finish all distribution so I can start collecting? Maybe I can distribute and collect in parallel too, right? So basically, again, maybe I can make this relationship finish to finish. Okay. But if you make it, you have here now something illogical, which is what? Again, you started collecting results even before you started distributing results. So you need what? Again, to adjust the lag or adjust the relationship. So maybe I need to add 2 days lag or 3 days lag, for instance. Okay. So now I have this logical relationship, and so on. Okay, until you review everything and you reach the final schedule, which makes sense with durations, with sequence, and so on. Okay. Now, if you have noticed, the weekends are not considered, of course, working days. So if this is, for instance, 5 days task or activity, then the 2 days will not be counted. Okay, they are not working days. This is how Microsoft Project works. And of course, you can adjust everything. You can adjust the weekends, you can adjust the the working time, and so on. Okay. So this is how we work. This is how you develop schedules. And you identify all the activities for all work packages, you list them, and you sequence them, and you estimate the duration, and then you see options to compress your project schedule. Okay. Now, this was easy, considering that we are using Microsoft Project, right? But if you don't have Microsoft Project, then you need probably to do it with a pen and with a paper and pen, and you can consider another diagram that we will discuss, but after we take a little break, right? Okay, so let's take a 15 minutes break and continue explaining developing the project schedule. Okay, so see you after 15 minutes. So welcome back to the lecture again, and we're still discussing developing the schedule of a project. So basically, again, we started by identifying the list of activities for each work package that we need to do. And the next step was to sequence those activities and estimate their durations. Now, here are some guidelines. Of course, you need to review the schedule management plan that indicated who and how we do this, and the scope baseline, especially the WBS, because we depended on the WBS and the work packages, of course. You need to take into consideration, again, all the time you mentioned that, you need to take into consideration the EEFs and OPAs. You analyze and decompose each work package into activities. If you need to consult with SMEs, subject matter experts, you do this for any reason, unfamiliar material or things that are not clear to you or whatever. You evaluate the constraints and assumptions. Sometimes you have some constraints that you need to respect in your project schedule. For instance, a deadline that we need to meet. So we need to, again, compress the project schedule in a way or another to meet the deadline. If you have certain constraints, you need to respect them. And then you have this list of activities. Now, those activities will not take place at the same time, and for that reason, you need to consider the dependency between those activities and the relationship, right? And as you have seen, we have actually 4 types of relationships, right? Now, dependencies have also 4 types. Dependencies can be mandatory, so there is no other way around it. You need to finish the design before you start printing. This is mandatory. You cannot do otherwise, right? It can be discretionary, or we call it preferred logic, or soft logic. So basically, you can wait until we print all the survey and then start distributing it. But this is a preferred logic or a soft logic, because actually it's not mandatory. You can start distributing while at the same time you continue to print the survey, right? So if you have this sort of dependency, we call it soft logic or preferred logic. The dependency can be external. For instance, if I'm going to print the survey in a print house, a contractor or a supplier, then this is an external dependency, because I'm dependent on an external party. And it can be internal. For instance, if I need a resource that is not available now because he's working in other department, for instance, the designer that I need to design, that will design the survey for me, is currently not available because he is engaged with other project. Then this is an internal dependency, and this also needs to be taken into consideration, right? So for that reason, when we explain the resources and the resource planning, it's important to us to know the resource calendar. When would these resources be available, and when would these resources not available, because they're engaged in other projects and they're engaged in other department work and so on. Okay, so this is an internal dependency that I need also to take into consideration. Now, whatever the type of dependency that you determine, you determine the relationship, the precedence relationship. So how are these activities linked, or what type of relationship exists between or among those activities? We discussed 4 types of activities, right? So the most common and the safest activity is finish to start. So you wait until you finish A, then you proceed to B. This is a finish to start dependency. But there are other situations where the start is dependent on the start. So you cannot start B until you start A. When A starts, you can start B. Or it can be finish to finish. So when you finish A, you can finish B. And there is another type which is rarely used, which is start to finish. You need to start A in order to finish B. So B will continue to be carried on until A starts. Take, for instance, when working in shifts, if you are, for instance, a medical doctor working in a shift, and your shift is from 8 to 10, and the next doctor that you will hand over to, the shift does not come exactly at 10, you cannot go home, right? You cannot just say the time is 10 and I need to go home and khalas. No, you need to continue working. You cannot finish your shift. The shift continues until the next doctor comes and you can make the handover. So when the next shift starts, you can finish your shift, right? This is a start to finish relationship. And this is, again, this is rarely used. Okay, the most common type is the finish to start. The most rare, or the relationship that is rarely used, is start to finish. Now, remember also that you need to consider lags that might exist between 2 relationships. and leads as well. You might have leads as well. Let me give you an example. So for instance, the relationship between collect results and analyze results is now finished to start, okay? But if, for instance, analyzing results can start 1 day before finishing collecting result, because you need to set up, you know, the computer and the software of, you know, of the statistics and so on. So this is what we call lead. Now, lag is a waiting time that you need to wait, while lead is the other way around. So it's expressed in minus. Now let's see what happens here. You see? So 1 day before finishing the collection of results, you can start analyzing those results, because you have here a lead of 1 day. Okay, you understand now? So this is a lead. Now, if you put it positive, it's a lag, right? So you need to wait 1 day after collecting results in order to start analyzing those results. Okay, so you need also to consider leads and lags while you develop the schedule. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. In traditional approaches, as we mentioned earlier, I think, we estimate the activity duration using the hours, right? Or the effort. We call it the effort, which are expressed in hours, days, weeks, whatever, okay? But again, in Agile, we don't use that. We use points, we use story points. But here, in traditional approaches, we estimate the duration and efforts. We have also another term, which is the elapsed time, which is the actual calendar time required for an activity to start to finish. Okay, this is a calendar time, not working days, so it takes into consideration as well the weekends. Okay, when you do the estimating in hours and effort, you also need to take into consideration the risks that might happen, the level of effort that you need from maybe more than one person, and the potential pitfalls. We might do this wrong and we need to repeat the work again or rework it again. So you also take this into consideration. And basically, there is a formula that we can use when you want to estimate durations accurately. And you can use the same formula for estimating duration and for estimating cost as well. And this formula is what we call the PERT analysis. So the PERT analysis can be used to accurately estimate the duration or the cost of an activity. It's also called the 3 points estimate. 3 points estimate, because it depends on 3 points, on estimating 3 points, which are the following: a pessimistic estimate. So this is the worst case scenario. So we usually ask, of course, the same resource that will be responsible for doing this activity. We ask them, what's your pessimistic estimate for doing this activity? What is the worst case? How long would this activity take in the worst scenario? Let's say, for instance, he gave us a pessimistic estimate of 20 days. And then, and then we ask for the optimistic estimate. So the best case, the best scenario, and the best case, how long would this activity take? let's for instance assume that he tell us, okay, if everything is ready and no fault in the equipment and the suppliers are on time and everything is well, we might finish this, for instance, in 8 days. Why this is the pessimistic when we assume that so many things will go wrong, okay? And then we ask them for the most likely estimate. So what's the most likely estimate for this activity to take? So considering the, the forecast, the regular circumstances and so on, he might estimate the most likely duration to be, for instance, 12 days. Okay, so now we have 3 estimates or 3 points. For that reason, we call it 3 points estimates. Now there are 2 ways, 2 formulas to use. One formula is what we call the triangular distribution. Now these are statistical formulas. Okay, so you have the triangular distribution where you basically use this formula. The expected time to finish this activity is basically you take the average of the 3 points. So it's the pessimistic estimate plus the most likely estimate plus the optimistic estimate, and you divide by 3. Okay, so 20 plus 20 is 40 over 3 is 11 point something, right? 11.3. This is the triangular distribution. But the more accurate analysis is what we call the beta distribution. Using this formula, the expected time to finish this activity is the pessimistic plus 4 times the most likely. Because since it's most likely, it has more probability of accuracy, right? This makes sense. This is the most likely, so it has more probability of accuracy, right? So for that reason, we multiply it by 4, okay? Plus the optimistic, and we divide by how much? Now you have here, yes, 1 and 4 and 1, so you need to divide by 6, exactly. So this is the formula that you use in beta distribution. Sometimes this shows up in the exam. They give you the pessimistic and optimistic and most likely estimates, and they ask you to do a PERT analysis using the triangular or using the beta distribution. So you need to know these formulas. Again, these formulas can be used in time estimation or duration estimation, and can be used also in cost. When we explain cost, you will also see that we can also use these formulas in cost estimation as well. Okay, so you get basically here a more accurate estimation of the duration, because it takes into consideration the risks, the threats and opportunities of what would happen while we do this activity. Okay, so that makes sense? Hope it does. Okay, and then when you do this, you can start creating the Gantt chart, right? You can start, as you've seen in Microsoft Project, you list those activities, you connect those activities, you review the relationships, you estimate the durations and so on. And of course, this is if you are using Microsoft Project and using the Gantt chart, but if you don't, or you are not using the Microsoft Project, you can also use another way. And this is important also a diagram that you can use, which is the network diagram. Now let me explain this a little bit. Let's go back here. Yeah. So using what we call the precedence diagramming method, this is a technique that you can use in order again to determine the sequence of those activities. Let me just here, okay, clear this. a little bit. Oops. Okay. So basically what we do, it's also called activity on node, AON. We will represent each activity here with a node. Okay. So of course we have here the start of the project. This is a node. And then we have 6 nodes for each activity, right? So this is the first node, the second node, the third node, 4th, 5, 6, and the end. Okay, so you have here the start, and then you have here activity 1, activity 2, activity 3, activity 4, activity 5, activity 6, and then you have the end. Okay. So what you do basically is to represent those relationships or this sequence using this diagram. So from start, what do we start with? We start by designing the survey, right? So start to 1. And then you need to finish 1. You need to finish the design before you proceed to 2, right? Printing the survey. And then from 2 to 3. But again, this is not mandatory to be a finish to start relationship. It can be finish to finish, right? So basically, each arrow represents a finish to start relationship, unless you otherwise specify. So for instance, here I can put FF to indicate that this is a finish to finish relationship between 2 and 3. And if there is a lag, I will add it. For instance, +1. It means that the relationship between 2 and 3 is finish to finish. So you cannot finish 3 until you finish 2 with a lag of 1. So you need to wait 1 day after 2 finishes so you can finish 3. Okay. And then you continue this way. So from 3 to 4, it might also be finish to start or start to start or finish to finish or whatever. Okay, until you reach the end. Okay, when you do this for all the activities in the project, then you have created what we call a network diagram. So what's the use of a network diagram? The use of a network diagram that indicates to us the sequence of executing the activities, right? And this leads us to also a very important concept, which is the critical path. Okay, now what's the critical path and how we can use it in order to determine the project duration? I'll need to clear all this. Okay, and let's take an example of a network diagram as following. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so let's assume that we have here the start, and I have activity A, activity B, activity C, activity D, activity E, and this is the end. Okay, and for simplicity, we will assume that all the relationships here are finish to start. And let's assume that the durations are as following. A will take 3 days, C will take 5 days, D will take 8 days, B will take 2 days, E will take 7 days. Okay. Now, Can you tell me how long this project will take? Anyone? Can you tell me how long will this project take? Give me a number. 16. Okay. Do you agree? All? How do you come to this result? Or is it 25? Now, actually, in order to get to know the duration of the project, you need to consider the paths. How many paths do we have from start to end? Okay, let's see how many paths we have. For instance, we have this path, right? From start to A, to C, to D, to end. We have other path, which is from A to C to E to end, right? And we have other path, which is from B to C to D to end. And we have other path, which is from B to C to E to end. We have 4 paths. Is that correct? Which are, again, I'll write them here. We have the path A, C, D, which takes how long? A, C, D, 3, 5, 8, 8 and 8 equals 16, okay? And we have another path, which is ACE, which takes 3 and 5 and 7, 15. And we have the path BCD, which takes 2 and 5, 7, 8, 15. And we have BCE, which takes 2 and 5, 7 and 7, 40. Great. So basically what we have is like we have a starting line, and then I have 4 paths, right? Path with 16 days, and another path with 15 days, and another path with 15 days as well, and even another shorter path of 14 days. So which path determines the end line? The end line is determined by what? By the longest path, which is the ACD, right? ACD. Is that correct? While other shorter paths, they don't actually determine the duration of the project. That makes sense? And this is basically what we call the critical path. So what is the critical path? The critical path is the longest path from start to end in the project. And it determines, it determines the duration of the project. It's the shortest path to finish the project. Can you finish the project in less than 16 days? You cannot finish the project in less than 16 days, right? You need 16 days at least to finish the project. Is that correct? So it's the longest path. This is the longest path from start to end, and the shortest time that we can finish the project with, or finish the shortest duration to finish the project with, okay? Let's see that on Microsoft project. so we understand it better. Let me take another empty blank project. Okay. Make it. Okay, so let's assume again we have A, B, C, D. A takes 5, 8, 3, 7. And I have relationship between A and B and relationship between C and D. Who can tell me now, where is the critical path? What's the duration of this project? What's the duration of this project? Okay, let's check. So basically, if you bring the summary, yes, this is a 13 days project. Where is the critical path? It's the longest path, which is A and B. 5 plus 8 equals 13, while C and D are not on the critical path, right? And basically, Microsoft Project helps you with that. If you tick here the critical tasks, Microsoft Project will color them in red for you. So you know that these are the critical activities, okay? So again, we have here critical activities and not critical activities. And this is important too, because for instance, if you want now to compress your project, can you compress your project by crashing activity D, for instance? If I add more resources to D to finish it in 5 days instead of 7, will this affect the project duration? No. Basically, you spent more cost and you have not benefited from it, right? So if you want to compress your project schedule, you need to compress what? You need to compress the critical activities. So basically, if you go to A and instead of doing it in 5 days, you do it in 4 days, then yes, you can compress your project schedule, okay? This is number one. Number two, C and D, since they are not critical, they have some float. We call it float. So you can delay them, right? You can delay them by a certain amount of time without affecting the project duration, right? So for instance, if C took, instead of 3 days, took 4 days, does that affect the project duration? No. So you have like some flexibility here, right? In C and D, you have a certain flexibility. But until a limit, because for instance, if you delayed C by, I don't know, by 6 days, then you will have 2 critical paths, because now they are equal. If you delayed C by more than that, then you have a new critical path. Now the critical path is CD. It's no longer AB. Okay, so this means that while we execute the project, the critical path might change. And this is important because for me as a project manager, again, I need to monitor the critical path because it always the path that determines the project finish date. Okay, so I need to know the float. We call it the float or slack of those activities, activity C and D. How do you suggest that we calculate the float of C and D? Of course, a Microsoft project can do that for you very easily. You just need to add here a column, just right click here and insert a column that is called total slack or float. And you see, right? So basically the critical activities have a float or slack of what? Critical activities have a float of 0, right? Because you cannot delay them. While non-critical activities like C and D have float, like 3 days here. You can delay C by 3 days or you can delay D by 3 days without affecting the project duration, okay? But we need a formula to calculate that. What is the formula to calculate that? This is how you calculate the float. Let me again explain it here. So basically, again, if you have this, oops. If you have here the starting line, okay, and you have here the ending line of the project, and you have the following activities. You have, for instance, activity A, and then activity B, and you have activity C. Okay, activity A is 5 days, activity B is 4 days, activity C is 6 days. Now, what is the critical path? Again, here in this example, critical path is AB, right? And the duration is 9 days. So basically, C has a float, right, of 3 days, right? And this means again that I can delay C, okay? So if you decide to delay C as late, or to make it as late as possible, then, okay, it can be delayed to this point, and you have the float here, right? This is the float. And if, of course, it's the same here, right? Now, this is the formula. So for non-critical tasks, if you decide to start them as soon as possible, then we call this an early start. You start as soon as possible, so it's an early start and an early finish. But if you decide to delay them as late as possible, then you have a late start with a late finish. In our example, the early start is 0. So you start 7 o'clock, right, in the morning. So this is 0. And since it is 6 days duration, so the early finish is 6, right? You finish on the 6th date. But if you delayed as late as possible, now the last day on the project is the 9th, right? So the late finish is 9. And since it's 6 days in duration, so the late start will be what? The late start will be on the 3rd day, correct? So now to calculate the float, you can calculate the float or the total float or the total slack by either from here or from here, right? So this distance is basically 9 minus 6, correct? Which is the late finish minus the early finish. Which is equal also to this, which is the late start minus the early start, 3 minus 0. So basically late start minus early start. So 9 minus 6 or 3 minus 0 equals what? Again, equals 3, which is the total float or the total slack, okay? So these are the formulas that you use to calculate the float. Late finish minus early finish, or late start minus early start. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, I'll save this. And I will also save this. Okay, so we can give it to you. Okay. So this is the critical path, and this is the benefit of the critical path. Now we do a certain representation, basically, when we want to calculate the critical path, but I'll keep it as an exercise for the next lecture, okay? how to use this representation of the activities in order to calculate the critical path and total float of all the activities. So I'll keep it as an exercise for the next lecture. Okay, so basically, again, the critical path is the longest path from start to finish. In the PMP exam, in the updated version of the PMP exam, we no longer see questions from this type where you need to do some calculations and it takes time. Basically, because any software can do this for you, so you don't need actually to do it yourself. So basically, the type of question that you can get in the exam is something similar to this, where they give you like this diagram and they ask you to calculate the duration of the project. So basically, you need to identify the longest path, and depending on the longest path or critical path, you identify the duration of the project. Okay, total float again is the amount of time that a scheduled activity can be delayed or extended from its yearly start date without delaying the project finish time. So basically, as we explained, you have another term, which is the free float, like in this example. For instance, here you have the non-critical activities, F, G, and H. But here, between F and G, if you delayed F, then G will be delayed as well, right? But you have here like, I don't know, like two days of flexibility. So this is what we call the free float. It's the amount of time that a scheduled activity can be delayed without delaying, not the project duration, without delaying the yearly start of the next activity. Okay, so in this example, there is no problem if we delay this on the project duration, but the problem will be on G. If we delayed F by more than 2 days, then G will be affected. G will be delayed. Okay, so it has an effect on the yearly start of the next activity. We call this the free float. Sometimes it comes as a definition in the exam. Okay. Okay, so basically we explained 3 ways to represent the project schedule, right? The Gantt chart, where we present all the activities with bars, and for that reason we call it as well the bar chart. The milestone chart, used specifically for the management and for the customer, because they are only interested in knowing the milestones and their dates. And the project schedule network diagrams, which help us identify the critical path and the float of all the activities, right? So basically, again, you use the Gantt chart to track the progress of the project with the team. You use the milestone chart to report to the customer and to the management. And you use the schedule network diagram to identify the critical path and the sequence of the activities and the float. Okay, sometimes you get questions on why we use one of these diagrams. Okay, great. I think we have, okay, let's keep that for the next lecture. Okay, I don't want to press you more than that. Okay, any question for the scheduling and the schedule planning that we explained today? Any question, ladies, gentlemen? Excellent. If you don't have any question, then wishing you a very pleasant evening, and see you inshallah next time on Thursday. Have a nice evening, be safe, and take care. Bye.